The projector flickered once, then displayed my first slide. Except it wasn't my slide. Not exactly. The charts were wrong, revenue projections reversed, market share data altered, my carefully researched conclusions twisted into something that made no sense. Numbers that should have shown growth now suggested decline. Strategic recommendations I'd spent weeks developing were jumbled and contradictory. Heat crawled up my neck as the 5 executives from Titanium Industries exchanged confused looks across the conference table. I could see them trying to reconcile what I was saying with what appeared on the screen behind me. Across the table, my colleague Marcus sat back in his chair, arms folded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He caught my eye for just a second, and in that moment, I understood completely. This wasn't a technical glitch. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate sabotage, and it was happening right now, in front of the most important client pitch of my career. My voice didn't shake when I continued speaking, but my hands did. I pushed through the presentation anyway, improvising as best I could. I apologize, there seems to be a technical issue with these slides. Let me walk you through the actual strategy. I abandoned the screen and spoke directly to the clients, trying to rebuild my credibility through verbal explanation alone. But the damage was done. The room had gone cold. Professional smiles had been replaced with polite but distant expressions. The CEO of Titanium Industries checked his watch twice. When it ended 15 minutes later, the senior executive stood and shook Marcus's hand first. Thank you for your insights during the presentation. Very helpful context. Marcus had contributed exactly 3 comments, all undermining my conclusions while appearing supportive. My stomach dropped as I watched him accept credit that should have been mine. We'll be in touch, the CEO said to me with a tone that suggested they wouldn't be. As the clients filed out, Marcus walked past my chair and patted my shoulder, leaning down to whisper, "Rough break. Technology can be unpredictable." His tone was sympathetic. His eyes weren't. I stood in the hallway outside the conference room, heart pounding, replaying every second. The altered slides. Marcus's convenient comments that highlighted exactly where my presentation had failed. The way the clients had looked at him for clarification, as if he were the authority and I was the confused junior associate. This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated, deliberate sabotage. My name is Juliet Blake. I'm 34 years old, and I've worked at Stratton Marketing Solutions for 6 years, climbing from junior analyst to senior strategist through nothing but hard work and results. I'd never lost a pitch. Never failed to deliver. My track record was flawless. Until today. This presentation could decide my future at the company. Titanium Industries was a potential multi-million-dollar account, and landing them would almost certainly lead to the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. Senior Director of Client Strategy, the position that would validate every late night, every weekend, every sacrifice. I stood there, letting the pieces fall into place, remembering who had access to my files. Only 3 people had editing permissions on my presentation: me, our department head, and Marcus. I thought back to the night before. I'd been working late, finalizing the presentation in my office. Around 8 p.m., Marcus had stopped by, coffee in hand, friendly smile in place. "Big day tomorrow," he'd said, leaning against my doorframe. "Nervous?" "Prepared," I'd replied, clicking through my slides one more time. "Mind if I take a quick look? Fresh eyes might catch something you missed." It had seemed generous. Collegial. We'd worked together for 3 years, collaborated on multiple projects, celebrated each other's wins over team lunches. I'd trusted him completely. "Sure," I'd said, sharing editing access through our system. "Any feedback would be great." He'd spent 20 minutes reviewing the deck, made a few minor suggestions about font sizes and transition timing. Nothing substantive. Nothing that would have raised alarms. "Looks solid," he'd said finally. "You're going to crush it." I felt sick now, realizing I'd handed him the knife he'd used to gut my presentation. He'd had access all night. Had probably waited until I'd left the office to make his changes, careful to preserve the file timestamps that would make the sabotage undetectable. Standing in that hallway, I made a decision: I wouldn't accuse him. Not yet. By mid-afternoon, Whispers had started circulating through the office. I was at my desk, trying to focus on damage control, when I heard Marcus's voice carry from the break room. He was talking to Kyle and Simone from the analytics team, his tone casual but calculated. She just cracked under pressure. It happens. High-stakes presentation, important client. Some people freeze up. I stood from my desk and walked closer, staying out of sight. The strategy was actually solid, Marcus continued. I could see what she was going for. But when you can't communicate it clearly, clients lose confidence. Really unfortunate. Kyle made a sympathetic sound. That's rough. She usually does well. Yeah, well, usually isn't when it really matters. I felt my jaw tighten. He wasn't just taking credit. He was actively poisoning my reputation, framing my competence as situational rather than consistent. Management's tone shifted toward me after that. Our department head, Patricia, stopped by my desk with a concerned expression. Juliet, about this morning. I know, I said quickly. Technical issues. It won't happen again. The client seemed confused. I'll follow up. I can clarify everything they need. She nodded, but her doubt was visible. That evening, I saw Marcus booking a private follow-up meeting with Titanium Industries. Just him. No mention of me. I stayed late that night, digging through documentation about the Titanium account. This wasn't just about one presentation. I learned that landing this client could lead to a promotion only one of us would get. The senior director position had been quietly promised to whoever brought in Titanium Industries. It was worth a $60,000 salary increase, equity options, and a seat at the leadership table. Losing this client meant I'd stagnate. Stay in my current role indefinitely while Marcus advanced. Watch him take credit for strategies I'd developed while I became the cautionary tale of someone who couldn't handle pressure. Winning this client meant everything I'd worked for finally materializing. I pulled up the project timeline. Marcus had been peripherally involved in the Titanium pitch from the beginning, but I'd done 90% of the strategic work. The market research, the competitive analysis, the positioning recommendations. He'd contributed surface-level input and attended a few planning meetings. But he had access. And he had ambition. And apparently, he had no problem destroying someone else's work to advance his own career. I realized he was betting on me spiraling. Expected me to complain, to seem defensive, to confirm his narrative that I'd failed under pressure. That's not what I was going to do. The next morning, I smiled. Marcus walked into the office around 9, looking well-rested and confident. When he saw me, he approached with an expression of concern that I now recognized as performance. Hey, Juliet. How are you holding up? I'm good, I said brightly. Yesterday was frustrating, but these things happen. He looked momentarily surprised by my composure. That's a healthy attitude. Not everyone bounces back from something like that. Well, the strategy is still solid. Just need to communicate it better. Absolutely. He paused. I actually have a follow-up meeting with them tomorrow. Patricia thought it might help to have a fresh perspective. That makes sense, I replied, my voice steady. Good luck. I watched him walk away, confused by my lack of resistance. But I wasn't bouncing back. I was replaying details. Inside, my mind was working through timestamps, file versions, access logs. Something about his timeline didn't add up. That afternoon, I went through our shared project drive methodically. Every document. Every revision history. Every saved version. And there, buried in the version control system, I found something interesting. An older version of my deck, completely untouched, showing my original, correct slides, had been saved at 11:47 p.m. the night before the presentation. Just minutes before my final version had been corrupted. Only 2 people had been accessing the file during that window, me and Marcus. I quietly secured copies of everything. Marcus started bragging by Wednesday. I overheard him on a call in the conference room, door half open, speaking to what sounded like a contact at another firm. Yeah, the Titanium account is basically mine at this point. Just need to close it formally, but they're responding really well to my approach. My research, my strategy. He'd stopped even pretending the work had been collaborative. By Thursday, he was telling co-workers openly. Patricia pretty much confirmed that whoever lands titanium gets the senior director role. And I've got a really good feeling about my meeting with them tomorrow. He walked past my desk that afternoon and paused. Hey Juliet, actually, would you want to sit in on the presentation tomorrow? Might be good for you to see how they respond to the material when it's delivered effectively. The condescension was barely hidden. He was inviting me to watch him succeed with my own work, framed as an educational opportunity for someone who'd failed. Sure, I said calmly. I'd like that. His smile widened. Great. Consider it a learning opportunity. He had no idea what I was actually learning. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Friday in the same conference room where I'd been sabotaged. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, setting up his materials with practiced confidence. The presentation he'd prepared was essentially mine. My strategy, my research, my recommendations, with minor cosmetic changes. I sat in the corner, notepad in hand, and said little as the titanium executives arrived. Marcus launched into the presentation with enthusiasm. He hit all the major points I'd developed, explained the strategic framework I'd built, outlined the implementation timeline I'd created. But when the clients started asking deeper questions, his confidence faltered. Can you explain the methodology behind your market segmentation? The CEO asked. Marcus stumbled slightly. Well, it's based on standard industry practices. Which practices specifically? Your competitor analysis suggests some novel approaches. Right, yes, the novel approaches stem from. He trailed off, glancing at his notes. I watched the client's expressions shift. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Doubt creeping in around the edges. The CFO leaned forward. And the ROI projections. What assumptions are you using for customer acquisition costs? Marcus gave a generic answer that didn't actually address the question. After the meeting ended, as everyone gathered their materials, the CEO approached me directly. Ms. Juliet, could I speak with you for a moment? We stepped into the hallway, out of Marcus's earshot. The CEO, William Chen, studied me with sharp eyes. I wanted to ask about some discrepancies between this presentation and the one you gave earlier this week. My pulse quickened. What kind of discrepancies? The strategic framework is similar, but your original presentation, despite the technical issues, seemed to have more depth, more nuanced thinking. The conclusions were stronger, even if the slides were problematic. I chose my words carefully. I developed most of the strategic research. Marcus contributed some valuable perspectives. I see. He handed me his business card. Would you mind sending me some clarifying information on the original strategy? Specifically the market segmentation methodology and the ROI assumptions. I'd like to understand the thinking more completely. Of course. I'm happy to provide whatever details would be helpful. Send it directly to me, he said, glancing back toward the conference room where Marcus was packing up. No need to CC the team. The implication was clear. He'd noticed something was off, and he wanted to understand what. That afternoon, I received an email from William Chen with specific questions about strategic elements only I could answer, because I'd developed them. I responded carefully, providing clear, detailed explanations. No accusations. No blame. Just clean, professional answers that demonstrated complete mastery of the material. His response came within an hour. Would you be available for a private call tomorrow? I'd like to discuss some of these elements in more depth. The call was scheduled for Saturday morning at 9. I spent Friday evening preparing, reviewing every element of my original strategy, ensuring I could speak fluently about every assumption, every data point, every recommendation. Saturday morning, I dialed in from my home office, coffee in hand. Ms. Juliet, thank you for taking the time, William said. His tone was professional but curious. I've been reviewing the materials you sent, and I have to say, the thinking is significantly more sophisticated than what we saw in yesterday's presentation. I appreciate that. Walk me through your market segmentation approach. How did you identify those specific customer clusters? I explained the methodology, the data sources I'd used, the statistical analysis I'd run, the behavioral patterns I'd identified through primary research. I walked him through my logic step by step, answering his follow-up questions with precision. There was a long silence on the line after I finished. "Miss Juliet," William finally said, "can I ask you a direct question?" "Of course." "Who actually developed this strategy?" The moment stretched between us. I could deflect. Could maintain the company fiction that this was collaborative work. Could protect Marcus and preserve team harmony. But I was done protecting people who sabotaged me. "I did," I said simply. "I conducted all the primary research, developed the strategic framework, and created the implementation roadmap. Marcus provided feedback on a few elements, but the core strategy is mine." Another pause. "That's what I suspected," William said. "We'll need to reevaluate internally before moving forward." By Monday, Marcus sensed something slipping. I arrived at the office to find him waiting near my desk, arms crossed, expression harder than I'd seen before. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" "About why Titanium's CEO is asking questions about who developed what. About why you're apparently having private conversations with the client." He asked me to clarify some strategic elements. I replied evenly. I answered his questions. "You went behind my back." I responded to direct questions from a client. "That's not going behind anyone's back, that's doing my job." His jaw tightened. "You're trying to undermine me." "I'm trying to serve the client. If that threatens you, maybe you should ask yourself why." "This is going to end badly for you, Juliet." His voice dropped to something that might have been meant as threatening. "I'll make sure Patricia knows you're sabotaging team dynamics. That you can't be trusted to collaborate." I held his gaze steadily. "Do what you need to do, Marcus." He walked away frustrated, and I realized he'd just confirmed my suspicions completely. Guilty people don't get defensive about innocent questions. That afternoon, I received an email from Patricia, "Juliet and Marcus, please join me tomorrow at 10 a.m. for a project review on the Titanium account." The reckoning was coming. I spent Monday evening preparing. Not to attack, but to protect myself. I compiled everything methodically, file version histories showing exactly when changes were made, email chains documenting my research process, meeting notes proving my involvement, access logs showing who'd edited what and when. Everything clean. Everything factual. Everything defensible. I wasn't going to accuse Marcus of sabotage. I was simply going to present an accurate timeline of the project's development and let the facts speak for themselves. The next morning, I arrived at Patricia's office with a folder of documentation. Marcus was already there, looking confident. He'd clearly decided to frame this meeting as an opportunity to highlight my instability, my inability to work collaboratively, my tendency to undermine team success. Patricia gestured for us to sit. "I've had some interesting conversations with Titanium Industries over the past few days. They've raised questions about the strategic work and who was primarily responsible for its development. I'd like both of you to walk me through your contributions to this project." Marcus jumped in immediately. "I think there's been some miscommunication. This was obviously a team effort." "I'd like to start with a timeline," Patricia interrupted. "Juliet, can you outline the project from the beginning?" I pulled out my documentation and began. I walked through the project chronologically. I initiated the Titanium pitch in March after identifying them as a potential target through market research. I spent April conducting primary and secondary research on their business model, competitive position, and strategic needs. In May, I developed the market segmentation framework and strategic positioning recommendations. I showed the dated documents, the email chains, the research files. Marcus joined the project in late May, providing feedback on presentation formatting and suggesting a few minor adjustments to the executive summary. His contributions were valuable, but limited to refinement rather than strategy development. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I think that undersells my involvement." I'm working from the project files, I said calmly. Everything I'm describing is documented. Patricia took the folder from me, reviewing the timestamps. And the presentation that was delivered last week, who built that deck? I built it. I shared editing access with Marcus the night before at his request, so he could review for any final issues. And when was the final version saved? The original, correct version was saved at 11:47 p.m. The corrupted version, the one that was actually presented, was saved at 11:52 p.m. Patricia's expression shifted. Who was accessing the file during that window? I met her eyes. The access logs show two people, me and Marcus. Marcus's confidence was starting to crack. There could have been a system glitch. The changes weren't random, I said quietly. Charts were specifically altered to reverse my conclusions. Data was changed in ways that made the strategy appear flawed. That's not a glitch. The room went silent except for the sound of Patricia turning pages. Patricia asked Marcus to walk through his understanding of the strategy. Explain the market segmentation methodology, she said. Marcus gave a high-level overview that hit the main points but lacked any real depth. When she pressed for specifics, the data sources, the statistical approach, the behavioral patterns, he fumbled. Those details are all in Juliet's research files. But you presented this strategy to the client. Surely you can explain the methodology. Well, obviously I understand it, but the specific technical elements. Patricia turned to me. Jordan, can you explain it? I could. In detail. Without hesitation. Because I'd developed it. I walked through the entire methodology, answered every follow-up question, explained every assumption and conclusion. The difference between my fluency and Marcus's vague generalities was undeniable. Patricia closed the folder. The client has specifically requested that Juliet be their primary point of contact moving forward. They've said they want to work with the person who actually developed the strategy. Marcus went pale. You're removing me from the account? I'm assigning the appropriate resources based on client needs and project contribution. This is, Marcus looked at me, his expression shifting from anger to something like desperation. This is because she went behind my back. She poisoned them against me. The client made this decision based on their conversations with both of you, Patricia said firmly. They know who developed the work. Marcus stood abruptly. This is unacceptable. We'll discuss this further, Patricia said. Privately. Juliet, you're dismissed. Thank you for the documentation. I gathered my materials and walked out, hearing Marcus's raised voice starting behind me as the door closed. The next week, Marcus was officially removed from the Titanium account. I learned from Kyle, who'd heard it from Patricia's assistant, that this wasn't Marcus's first incident. There'd been complaints from other colleagues about his tendency to take credit for collaborative work. Questions about his involvement in other project miscommunications. Nothing proven before, but a pattern nonetheless. The sabotage had been brazen enough to finally trigger consequences. Marcus became distant and hostile. He'd pass me in the hallway without acknowledgement, eat lunch alone in his office, leave meetings early. The charming colleague I'd once trusted was gone, replaced by someone bitter and isolated. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. Just exhausted relief that the truth had surfaced before he'd permanently damaged my reputation. 2 weeks later, Patricia called me into her office. Titanium Industries has officially signed with us, she said. 3-year contract, significant scope. They've requested you as their dedicated strategist for the duration. That's excellent news. It is. It also means we need to discuss your role here. She slid a folder across her desk. Inside was an offer letter for the Senior Director of Client Strategy position, the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. The role is yours, Juliet. You've earned it through the quality of your work and your integrity under pressure. The salary was exactly what I'd hoped for. The title was everything I'd worked toward. The validation was overwhelming. Thank you, I managed. Thank you for not letting someone else's insecurity derail your career. I passed Marcus in the hallway for the last time on a Thursday afternoon. He was carrying a box of his personal belongings. I later learned he'd resigned rather than face the performance review Patricia had initiated. Took a position at a smaller firm where his reputation hadn't preceded him yet. When he saw me, he stopped. For a moment, I thought he might say something, apologize, explain, justify. Instead, he just looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe. Or just resentment at being caught. I nodded once, professionally, and kept walking. There was nothing to say. He'd gambled that sabotaging me would elevate him, and instead, his arrogance had destroyed the career he'd been trying to advance. That Friday, Patricia announced my promotion to the department. There was applause, genuine congratulations from colleagues who'd watched the situation unfold. Several people approached afterward to say they'd suspected Marcus's involvement but hadn't known how to address it. "You handled that incredibly well," Kyle said during the celebration. "I would have lost my mind." "I almost did," I admitted. "But losing my mind wouldn't have helped me win." The titanium account became one of our most successful client relationships. I built on the original strategy, expanded into new service areas, and exceeded every performance metric they'd hoped for. 6 months later, William Chun sent me a personal note. "Working with you has been one of the best business decisions we've made. Thank you for your integrity and excellence." Looking back now, I understand what happened that day in the conference room. Marcus won the room for a moment. He had the charm, the confidence, the ability to perform credibility. For those few minutes during my sabotaged presentation, he looked like the more competent professional. But I won the future. I won it by not panicking. By documenting everything. By responding to sabotage with strategy instead of emotion. By letting my work speak louder than his manipulation. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't make dramatic accusations. Didn't rush revenge. I simply let the truth do the work. Because here's what I learned. Competence is undeniable. You can fake it for a moment, hide behind someone else's work, perform expertise you don't possess. But eventually, the questions get specific enough that only real knowledge can answer them. Marcus bet that destroying my presentation would destroy my credibility. He didn't account for the fact that credibility isn't built in a single presentation. It's built through consistent demonstration of skill, through depth of knowledge, through the ability to explain not just what you did but why and how. The sabotage revealed more about him than it did about me. And when the clients started asking the questions that matter, the difference between performance and substance became impossible to hide. The promotion changed my trajectory at Stratton completely. Within a year, I'd brought in 3 more major accounts, built a team of talented strategists, and established myself as one of the company's key leaders. The work I'd done on titanium became a case study we used in new business pitches. I hired carefully, looking for people with both skill and integrity. People who'd lift others up rather than tear them down. We built a culture where collaboration meant actual collaboration. Sharing credit, supporting each other's success, celebrating wins together. Everything Marcus had tried to take from me became the foundation of something better. I thought about him sometimes. Wondered if he'd learned anything from what happened. If he'd recognized that the real tragedy wasn't getting caught but needing to sabotage someone else in the first place. Real confidence doesn't require diminishing others. Real competence doesn't need to steal credit. Real success doesn't depend on someone else's failure. Marcus had possessed talent. He could have built his own success legitimately. Instead, he'd chosen the shortcut of destroying someone else's work, and that choice had cost him everything. 2 years after the sabotage, I received a LinkedIn message. It was from Marcus. Brief, carefully worded, "I saw your promotion to VP. Congratulations. You deserved it." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decide if it was genuine remorse or just networking. Maybe both. Maybe he'd grown. Maybe he was still the same person, just better at hiding it. I replied simply, "Thank you. I hope you're doing well." I didn't elaborate. Didn't offer to reconnect or suggest coffee. Just acknowledged his message and moved on. Because forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. You can release resentment without inviting someone back into your life. You can recognize that someone acted badly while also recognizing that you've moved past it. Marcus had taught me something valuable, though not what he'd intended. He'd taught me that my worth wasn't determined by whether people chose to see it. That my competence existed independently of others' acknowledgement. That the right people would eventually recognize value, even when others tried to obscure it. The sabotage had hurt. But it had also clarified who I was and what I was capable of achieving when I trusted my own abilities instead of seeking validation from people who didn't deserve to give it. 5 years later, I'm an executive vice president. I lead a division of 60 people. We handle the company's most complex accounts. My team has won industry awards, exceeded revenue targets, and built a reputation for strategic excellence. The path from that sabotaged presentation to here wasn't straight. There were other challenges, other obstacles, other people who underestimated me or tried to limit my success. But that day in the conference room taught me something I carried through every subsequent challenge. Panic is optional. Drama is optional. Revenge is optional. Clarity is not. When someone tries to sabotage you, the most powerful response isn't retaliation, it's documentation. It's staying calm enough to gather facts. It's being professional enough that when the truth emerges, your credibility is intact. Marcus had counted on me being emotional. Had expected me to accuse him publicly, to seem paranoid or vengeful, to confirm his narrative that I couldn't handle pressure. Instead, I'd stayed strategic. Let him think he'd won. Collected evidence. Responded to the client's questions with the competence he could only fake. And when the moment came to reveal what had happened, I didn't need to accuse anyone. The facts did it for me. I mentor young professionals now, and I tell them this story. Not to warn them that colleagues might sabotage them, though some will. But to remind them that their response to adversity matters more than the adversity itself. Someone tried to destroy my career in a single morning. For a few hours, it looked like they'd succeeded. The presentation had failed. The clients had been confused. My reputation had been damaged. But that failure wasn't the end of my story. It was a test of whether I could respond to crisis with strategy instead of emotion. Marcus won a moment. I won the trajectory. He got the immediate satisfaction of watching me struggle. I got the career I'd earned and the self-respect that comes from winning honestly. And here's the thing about sabotage, it reveals the saboteur more than the victim. When Marcus altered my slides, he revealed his own insecurity. When he bragged about stealing my work, he revealed his arrogance. When he couldn't answer the client's detailed questions, he revealed his incompetence. I didn't need to destroy him. He destroyed himself by choosing tactics that required my failure instead of building his own success. The titanium account is still with us. We've expanded the relationship significantly over the years. What started as a single marketing strategy engagement has grown into a comprehensive partnership across multiple service lines. William Chun and I have become genuinely friendly. Not just in a professional networking way, but in a mutual respect way. He told me once, years later, why he'd reached out to me after that second presentation. Marcus's presentation was polished, he said. But it felt performed. Like he was reciting something he'd memorized, rather than explaining something he understood. Your original presentation, despite the technical problems, felt authentic. Even when the slides were wrong, you knew what you were talking about. I didn't feel very authentic at the time, I admitted. I felt humiliated. That's because you were actually experiencing the moment instead of performing through it. That authenticity is why I wanted to understand what had happened. Real competence has a texture to it, a depth, an ability to explain not just what but why, to answer unexpected questions, to adapt when circumstances change. You can copy someone's slides. You can memorize their talking points. You can perform their conclusions. But you can't fake the understanding that comes from actually doing the work. Recently, I was invited to speak at an industry conference. The topic was building resilient careers in competitive environments. I talked about the titanium situation, not naming names, but telling the story honestly. After my talk, a young woman approached me during the networking break. Someone did something similar to me last year, she said quietly. Took credit for my work on a major project. I was so angry, I went to leadership immediately and accused them. It didn't go well. I looked emotional and unprofessional, and the person I accused denied everything. I almost quit. What did you do? I stopped reacting emotionally. Started documenting everything. When the next opportunity came, I was ready. I let my work speak for itself. Did it work out? She smiled. I got promoted last month. The person who stole my credit is still in the same role, wondering why they're not advancing. That's the thing about shortcuts, they're temporary. You can steal credit once, maybe twice. But eventually, people want to see if you can actually do the work. And if you can't, the facade crumbles. Meanwhile, competence compounds. Each project you genuinely understand makes you better at the next one. Each skill you actually develop becomes a foundation for building more. Marcus thought he was taking my success. Really, he was ensuring his own stagnation. Sometimes I still think about that moment when the projector flickered and I saw my sabotaged slides. The heat crawling up my neck. The executive's confused expressions. Marcus's hidden smile. In that moment, I had a choice. I could panic, accuse, spiral. Or I could stay calm, gather information, and respond strategically. The revenge I got wasn't the revenge I imagined in that first moment of shock and betrayal. It wasn't public humiliation or dramatic confrontation. It was quieter than that. More permanent. It was building a career Marcus could only pretend to have. It was earning respect he could only perform. It was winning the client he thought was his by actually being the person he'd tried to appear to be. I didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself by choosing tactics that required my failure instead of developing his own capabilities. My revenge was simply being undeniable. Know your worth. Document your work. Stay sharp when others expect you to break. And remember, arrogance eventually defeats itself. All you have to do is stay competent and calm long enough to watch it happen. The client he thought was his became mine not because I took it, but because I earned it. And that made all the difference.